Hello and welcome back to Enter the Abyss.
We got an interesting story for you tonight.
We got an interesting topic. I think we're going to do something a little different where we're both covering kind of the same overall topic.
Right. So tonight we're going to go over reincarnation. I'm specifically going to kind of look at it at a 30,000 foot view.
And I'm actually going to talk about a couple of stories that I was able to track down online that revolve around reincarnation. I mean, whether or not you believe in it, some of these stories are kind of creepy and they're kind of crazy, and it kind of makes you think about it. But yeah, we're going to cover a specific topic. And again, I know we talk about this a lot as we're just starting, but if you have something you want us to cover, please shoot us an email, entertheabysspod@gmail.com. But let's jump into it, Cleet.
Okay, so the topic tonight is reincarnation. So I don't know about you, but the more I started to research this, I kept getting these strange facts that actually made the hair on my arms just raise up because they're so weird.
Yeah, there was a couple of stories that I came across that kind of made me think. Now I'm gonna be honest. I'll share something. The thought of death used to scare the shit out of me.
I'm going to tell you a weird story, Britton. So again, this is going to be one of those, you heard it first on this podcast. Do you believe in reincarnation at all?
I don't know. See, that's kind of what I was going to say is I used to be afraid of death because I didn't know where it goes. And I don't want to get into any religious stuff. Obviously, It's all kind of religious based. I don't want to get into that. But me personally, I was always kind of afraid of what happened after death when I was younger. But as of now, again, I don't know. Some of these stories that I came across, it kind of makes me wonder. It really does.
So when I was 16, I went to bed and I had a very weird dream. And I had a dream that I was in the Civil War in America. You know, when you're in a dream, you kind of just understand like the context without it being explained to you.
It all just makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm out on the battlefield with my gun that has like a spear on the tip of it. A bayonet. And I'm in there and I'm shooting it, and all of a sudden a bullet hits my heart. And I felt my heart like beat sporadically and weird, and it felt so real. And I felt like that's where I died. And I woke up the next day, and it just so happens I was going to donate blood with my friend at the Red Cross. And they took my blood pressure, and they said it was too low, and they denied me to donate blood that day, which I thought was just a very strange set of events.
That is really weird. And they typically say that like reincarnation, it's a lot of typically it is experienced in a dream. Like sometimes you'll kind of dream of instances of your past life or even like deja vu. I'm sure you'll cover it mostly, but yeah, I mean, I haven't specifically had any crazy dreams about that. I mean, I've had some deja vu stuff, but I don't know. Maybe if I had a very boring past life. Like, I don't know. I haven't really experienced much of it myself.
You weren't Cleopatra in another life, Britton?
God, I wish. I mean, I wish I was someone special, but I was probably just like a fisherman.
I was a janitor.
Okay, that's cool.
All right, guys, let's jump into this. So reincarnation can mean a lot of things to different people, but it's generally divided into two categories, that being philosophical or religious. The general premise is that a non-physical essence of a living being starts a new life in a different body after biological death. This process is called rebirth or transmigration. Reincarnation is a Latin word literally meaning entering the flesh. The idea of reincarnation popped up in the, I'm going to butcher this, Upanishad of the late Vedic period, which is around 1100 to 500 BCE. This idea predates the Buddhist religion. In the earliest Vedic written history, talks about the controversy of sending someone to heaven or hell, stating that it was too simplistic. It argued that people do virtuous things and indulge in their vices. That line of logic told them that it wouldn't be fair to send them to heaven or hell, as that's an absolute result with a reward or punishment on the line. They are then suggesting that just maybe people go to a particular heaven or hell proportionate to one's merit.
Yeah.
This thought was the seed that started to mold into reincarnation.
Okay, I was going to say, so this started before before the Buddhist religion, which I know is one of the biggest religions that believe in reincarnation.
It's Buddhism and Hinduism. Those are the predominant religions.
So this idea started before Buddhism. I don't know when Hinduism started. But I don't want to even get into that. I mean, yeah. I don't know.
We're not religious scholars here, and I don't want to be. As with every good idea, it spreads like a grassroots movement. Soon, budding religions like Hinduism and Buddhism adopted this idea. They talked about good practices create karma, and almost like working like a bank, they accumulate through your life. The The more positive your karma, the better your rebirth, and vice versa. If you're a terrible person, you'll get a bad rebirth.
So I think that's where it started, the whole phrase of karma is a bitch.
Maybe you're just a terrible person in your previous life, Britton.
Okay, I mean, I'm just going to say this now. If karma is a thing, I'm screwed. I'm a little screwed.
Yeah, you are.
I like to think, okay, maybe not. I'm good, but I believe in karma. There's been a couple things that have happened.
So one thing I wanted to point out is the religions do disagree about some of the core assumptions of reincarnation, specifically on renewal. Hinduism believes that the soul or self exists and considers it to be unchanging and eternal. They talk about it as a journey of attaining self-knowledge across carnations.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, if you live in this body, you don't fully learn or understand something, you were reborn to continue your knowledge and your ever-seeking knowledge.
Yeah. And let's say like you live a life and you don't learn a specific lesson.
Right.
You could be reincarnated again in a particular circumstance to
until you learn it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. In stark contrast, Buddhism does not believe in the soul or self, and their core tenets is realizing of the non-self or emptiness, and they call that nirvana, which I don't 100% understand. Any Buddhists that are listening, please, talk about Buddhism for us.
Yeah, again, we're not experts. We primarily get our sources from the internet, which we all know is right 100% of the time.
Didn't Abraham Lincoln quote that?
I think so.
On the internet? So, when looking at the lens through philosophy, we can also look at Socrates, or as I like to call him, Socrates.
Socrates is a great man. He's the guy who is always questioning and trying to find out what everything is.
There was a rumor propagating that when Socrates was sentenced to death, he stated that, "I am confident that there truly is such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead."
I'm just going to shout this out. Socrates, if you are out there reincarnated, please email us. I want to know.
It's me, Britton. It's me.
I knew it.
All right, guys. From these ancient origins today, the idea of reincarnation is still taken seriously, even if they're not associated with a specific religion that teaches these tenets. In fact, there have been many researchers in the 20th century looking for examples of reincarnation. One person that I found that is slightly famous from this is called Ian Stevenson. He was a chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan. He worked with children around the age of 2 to 3 that would randomly talk about another life. They would speak of it as the life of a stranger or a deceased individual known to the child's family. In the cases where the child talked about the stranger's life, if given enough details, the investigators were able to find that particular family. They would then set up meetups with the child and that family, and some exciting things happened. The child was generally able to identify some of their names, as well as some items belonging to their deceased relative.
That's weird.
I mean, that just made my hair raise right there, right?
Yeah.
So imagine, Britton, you're having a kid, right? I don't want to throw that in the spotlight, but imagine at 2 to 3 they start talking about another life, and they're like, "Oh, I was from these people with this last name," and they give you enough specific information that you can find that family, and he can start telling you what their names are. And he's like, "I was that person who died, and here's my belongings." That's just creepy.
Yeah, I don't know. With how much horror stuff I watch and stuff, I'd be the one that I'm like, okay, I'm going to the computer, I'm Googling this shit, I'm going to find it out. Okay, we're going to set up a meeting. Yeah, no, if my son ever says something like that to me, I'm going to be like, oh, God. Okay, well, let's find out your previous life, because that's kind of interesting.
So this wasn't just a one-trick pony here. Stevenson was able to replicate the study and found these situations more common than expected, especially in Asia. Eventually, he decided to quit his prestigious position to study this full-time. Since then, he has collected over 2,500 cases of children remembering their past lives.
2,500?
Yes. And he put a lot of interesting claims and statistics put forth, and I'm going to kind of go over them with you guys. So, the kids would rarely describe living in faraway locations. So that would suggest that when you're reincarnated, you don't go far geographically.
Okay.
So, glad I don't live in North Korea, I'm just saying that. They described living ordinary lives and had routine occupations. And that kind of makes sense, right? There's only so many famous or rich people.
Right.
And odds are if you're reincarnated and let's say you lived in Utah 10 10 years ago before you died, you probably weren't someone rich or famous, right?
Are you saying there's no rich and famous in Utah?
I'm just saying statistically, you're not going to be like
You're in like
Romney
Hollywood
or
Hills or
Yeah.
in California. Okay, that makes sense.
The lives lived are recent ones. The average interval between death of the previous personality and the birth of the child is around 15 months.
That's weird.
Yeah, that is weird. 60% of the children who talked about being reincarnated experienced violent deaths. And that particular cohort generally had a shorter interval from end to birth.
My God.
What that's saying is if you died from a violent death, you were generally born earlier than 15 months.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, in my research, which we'll get into some of the stories, a lot of these are children, but like it really kind of upsets me that when children have to endure something like a violent death, and then as they're born again, they kind of have to relive something. And I've got some stories that talks about that, but it's just, that's sad.
It is sad. So the children typically started talking about their past lives from ages 2 to 5, and they almost always stopped talking about their previous life from the age from 5 to 8, where the earliest memories of their life are soon forgotten.
Right. Or upon the time when they perished and they don't remember more.
Right. They show extreme emotions or seriousness when talking about their previous life. They may cry about how much they miss their old family or show great anger when describing the killer of their violent death. Again, like if I had a kid who was crying at the age of like 3 saying he missed his family, and I'm like, I'm right here. Like that would just be so strange.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I have a son that's due here in the next couple weeks here as of recording this episode. And if he ever came to me and said, I really miss my other family, I personally don't know how the hell I would digest. I don't know. I mean, I'd be like, dude, where are your family?
I'm right here, man.
It's like, no, I miss Bob and Ann, and I was shot with a shotgun. I'm like, what the hell?
At least he was funny.
Yeah, you're just a pile of shit.
So the stronger the memories, the stronger the emotion, obviously. The children did not tend to make statements indicating great wisdom. So they talk about their past lives, but they wouldn't be like, hey, Britain, don't invest in the stock market because in 1929 all my money went away, right?
Right.
So they generally only talked about events from the end of their previous life. Almost 3/4 of the subjects described their mode of death of their past life. They are more likely to talk about people from the end of their life rather than the people earlier in it. So examples would be they would talk about memories that would include their spouses, children, rather than their parents or friends from their childhood.
Okay. So, I mean, people that they would typically remember from right before, okay, that makes sense.
Right. Few of the subjects talked about any time between lives. So that 15-month span, few talked about what was going on there, but it did happen.
Not like, so when they died and they're just waiting, they would talk about that.
Most wouldn't. There
Right,
was
15%.
I didn't have any percentages there. It just said a few of them would talk
Okay,
about
a few percentage. Maybe that's
So,
kind of where I got
I
that
would
mixed
assume
up.
it's 5% or less,
Okay.
right?
Those would be the ones I'd want to hear from. It's like, okay, what happens in between that time? I want to know.
We got some stories.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
in these minority cases, they would talk about staying near their homes or the site of their deaths. And they may describe seeing their funerals or other events that occurred after their deaths. Which, you know, a lot of the times when it comes to like ghost sightings, people talk about seeing like their loved one appearing at their houses or things like that.
It's typically around the place where they passed away. I mean, to kind of share a similar story, I don't mean to kind of cut you off here. I mean, I lived with my grandparents for a while, and we actually had my grandmother pass away in the home, and there were a few instances where you would literally catch a whiff of the perfume that she wore.
Oh, that's
and kind of see sightings. I mean, I know that house is haunted, and I'll talk about stories later on. I don't want to jump into it now, but like I never felt like attacked. It was so I'm wondering if she's like kind of in that zone of in that house, you know?
Right. The spirit's still lingering there. And we could definitely go over a future podcast talking about possibly hauntings we saw when we were kids, because I have a lot of stories there.
As do I.
Others report going to a discarnate realm, at times describing meetings with other beings as sages or guides. So that could be kind of going into like you're meant to learn something. So maybe you go and meet somebody and they're like, hey, this is going to be your new life. Here are the tragedies that you're going to have, the lessons that you need to learn. And yeah, bye-bye.
So I feel like if they told you that this is what you need to learn, it kind of. I mean, I guess maybe you
Well,
won't
remember
remember.
it,
Okay,
right?
so that's right. So how would you feel if you're in this middle realm per se, and they said, "Hey, you were meant to learn something, but you messed up big time. So we're gonna reincarnate you here as like a shitty person that needs to understand that you messed up terribly.
You need to suffer.
You need to suffer bad because you didn't suffer enough."
Well, Britain and all our viewers, if it is true, you have free will to try to bank as much karma as you can. In about 35% of these cases, the children bear a birthmark or a birth defect that matches a wound of the previous life, usually the fatal injury.
Yep.
So I'm kind of curious when I was going through all these stats because we haven't reviewed what we're going to go over. So I wonder what commonalities are going to be in your stories that you present later.
Yeah, the birthmark is something I actually have been told a couple times. Is it was kind of always a joke, like, oh, like I actually have a birthmark on my wrist. I don't know what caused me to die on my wrist, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of those common. That's a death mark from your past life.
I have a weird memory of when I was a kid, and our next door neighbor, she showed me this. She called it an angel kiss.
Yeah.
And she had something
Those are freckles.
Well, no, she was referring to a birthmark.
Ah.
And it was on her rib cage, and the skin was lighter than the rest of her body, and it would just never tan. Like it was just, it looked bizarre when I saw it when I was a kid.
But I mean, dying from a wound in your rib cage makes more sense than your wrist, the top of your wrist.
I don't know how you died, Bryn. You're a weird dude.
I'm not weird. My previous self might have been. Okay, maybe I'm a little.
The birthmarks tend to be unusual ones, often being puckered, scar-like areas, and some of them are said to have oozed or bled for some time after the child was born. That's interesting to me.
So, I mean, that would be kind of crazy. To me, I would almost think that it was like a very thin veil from the time they may have passed in the previous life till now, because if it's still bleeding, to me, that's really ominous.
Yeah, it is. I didn't find any specific cases on that, but maybe I'll come back with more research. But yeah, I thought it was strange. The birth defects are extremely rare. Stevenson talked about over 200 cases where he used post-mortem reports to match these birthmarks to people deceased in the past.
Okay, so he actually said, okay, well, there's a birth defect here on your neck. This guy died of a stabbing in the neck right around that same area. We're gonna try and compare the two.
Right. So there was a couple cases on there where someone got shot in multiple places where they died, and there was a child that he had who had those birthmarks where the bullet holes went through, like from the front of his chest to on the back of his back.
Wow.
Yeah, really strange stuff. Like statistically, it would be very improbable. I mean, it's quite the coincidence.
I mean, not to be morbid, but I kind of want to know if like a kid was born like after Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh God, man!
Like
maybe that was him.
The birthmarks would have been insane.
Oh man, I bet. 50% of the children that experienced a violent death had an extreme phobia towards the instrument that caused their demise.
Yeah, I have a story about that actually, where someone passed away by something and then they saw it later, but we'll get into that. But yeah, that's actually something I saw quite often as well.
Right. Stevenson put in there that there was an example of a baby that had an immense fear of water that when he was really young. Once reaching age 2, the toddler would talk about drowning in her previous life. Because It's like, where would that fear come from if you're just a little baby and you're getting like washed and you're just freaking out at all times when water's around you?
Yeah.
Just interesting.
Well, and on the topic, and this is a topic I want to discuss later as well, but the topic of phobias. I wonder if phobias will kind of play into a sense of like, I don't know, I'm just going to throw this out there for a good buddy of mine who has an absolute terrible phobia of clowns. Maybe he was murdered by a clown in a past life. We don't know. Maybe he was one of like Gacy's victims.
Oh my God.
Which I will be covering Gacy later, but that's absolutely going to happen.
Yeah, his IQ was way low if you didn't know that.
I knew that. Yeah, yeah.
Many of the children would show connections of their past life when playing pretend. For example, they would act out the occupational jobs that they had, and they could reenact the way that they died. Right.
So those kids just pretending to be killed?
Yeah, like they would have a playmate, and they would either be the killer or they would tell the kid to act as the killer. And
pretend to slit my throat.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that's
some
bizarre.
dark stuff, man.
So now I know what to look out for, like when my child is here, because if he starts having his friends over, like, hey, we're going to get around for like a public shooting. No, we're not doing that at all.
I would wait till the age of 2, see if you see anything weird, and don't influence his questions.
So after 2, if it goes away, we're good. He doesn't have a violent...
Well, it's between the
Pre-life.
ages of 2 to 5, man.
Okay, so I have to wait till he's 5?
Yeah.
God. Okay. Well, Arthur, when you're old enough and you're listening to this, please don't do this stuff. I hope your past life was okay. I'll do the best that I can. All right. So I mean, that's kind of the topic. Because I mean, is there anything else you have for us here, Cleet, on the topic of reincarnation?
No. I'm curious. So with your stories, with if any of these align with those statistical anomalies of the study.
Yeah. So I have 5 stories that I want to talk about. And again, these are all taken from various sources on the internet. Some of them I kind of cross-reference between websites, so some of them are pretty accurate. But again, I don't know. I mean, take these all with a grain of salt. It all depends on whether or not you believe in the idea of reincarnation. But yeah, I've got some pretty crazy stories. So we're going to start with the first one. That's kind of the more simple one. So essentially, there was a 3-year-old, right? So it's between the 2 to 5 year range, right? And he went up to his mom and said, "I like my new daddy." Right? So
Britton, if I had a kid who said that, I would think that my wife was cheating on me.
No, not gonna happen. I would be like, okay, so he's 3 years old. So the wife didn't understand and was like, okay. So because the dad was the kid's biological father, so she had no idea what he meant by new daddy. So she asked him why he said that, and the boy basically said, "My old daddy was really mean. He stabbed me in the back and I died. But I really like my new daddy. He'd never do that to me."
Violent death there.
Violent death, right? Now, it did. I looked and I didn't find anything about him having a birthmark on the back. But a 3-year-old doesn't just walk up and say shit like that. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they do. I guess I'll find out. But yeah, so that's kind of the first story. It was kind of odd. Like, I like my new daddy better. Okay, this one actually talks about a man who had dreams about him being a past life serial killer. So this comes from a Reddit user, and I'm just going to quote exactly what they put on there. "Since as long as I can remember, I've had vivid dreams about being a serial killer from the 1940s or 1950s. I lived in an old farmhouse in the middle of the woods, secluded from everyone else. I buried my victims, all of which were women with medium-length jet black hair and very pretty, on my property. There are at least 50, if not more. I've been dreaming about this guy since I can remember, and the details never change. I don't have a name or location, but it bothers me enough that I tried searching, and I don't think I was ever caught. Sometimes I have moments where I genuinely miss my old life. In this life, I wouldn't hurt a fly, and have dedicated myself to helping people. Sometimes certain situations trigger feelings that are not really me, and I'm not sure where they come from. It's always the same type of girl and always the same thoughts of how to disable her in order to get her back to my place. I've come to terms with it and pass it off as an intrusive thought, but I've never wanted to act on it in this life."
Wow. Maybe it was Ted Bundy.
It could have been. Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking at this too much, but I think that they go on a little bit too much. Like, now I've had these thoughts, but I'd never act on it. I'm like, well, if you're kind of having these thoughts of butchering a woman on your property, go see a psychiatrist.
This is kind of my bias, but I feel like the ones that are more believable are the ones where they're like, yeah, I had an ordinary life. I worked a 9 to 5. Like, you're like, oh, all right.
No, not like I have a dream every night where I butcher someone on my farmland and bury her, and it's always the same one every single night. I'm like, okay, go see a psychiatrist, check it out. Bro. You need a therapist. This next one I think is probably one of my favorites. So the one that actually kind of gave me chills. It kind of tells about a Chicago fire. So there was a mother. Her name was Erica, and her child was named Luke. Now Luke had a crazy tendency of actually calling all of his toys Pam, right? P-A-M, Pam. He would also go on saying that he used to be a girl who had black hair and wore the same earrings his mom did when he was a girl. So Erica wanted to know, what the hell he was talking about. So she asked him a little bit more about who Pam was. And the boy said, well, I was Pam. Well, I used to be, but I died and I went up to heaven. I saw God, and then eventually God pushed me back down. And when I woke up, I was a baby, and you named me Luke. So again, this one doesn't really tell me the age of the child, but I'm assuming they're probably within that 2 to 5 area. So Erica pressed Luke a little bit more for the details, obviously intrigued about what the hell he's talking about. So he told her that he used to live in Chicago. He rode the train all the time, and then he died in a fire.
It's always a violent death, man.
Right. Now, when he mentioned his death, he made this weird hand gesture indicating someone jumping out of a window. Like, I just imagine like the legs kind of like jumping, right? So the mom is listening to him going, okay, a little interesting. So she went to a computer with all this information and looked up, what he was talking about, and eventually came across a news story about a fire in the Paxton Hotel in Chicago. In March of 1993, 19 people died in the fire, including a woman by the name Pam, who died when jumping out of a window to escape the flames. So, you think about it, this young child, how is he going to know the exact details of this? He's not Googling Chicago fires and people jumping out of windows unless he's extremely morbid, but there's no way that he could know this information. So she never really discussed the fire with him or anything of that nature before. Now, she had a hard time believing him, but once she found the information, she's like, okay, this is a little weird. So she kind of started to believe in the idea of reincarnation after her son was talking about that.
Yeah, you just wonder where the kids could possibly come up with that. Because one of my theories about kids talking about reincarnation is their parents might be like avid believers.
Right.
And then they listen to what they say and create their own story, or they just, kids are smart.
Well, they're like sponges, right? They take up, unless she's sitting there talking about these morbid things, but it's just too, even the name of the victim, jumping out of a window, that's not something you can just pinpoint by accident.
Yeah, that's specific.
So that's that story. The next one I have here is also a 3-year-old. And I think that you were actually telling me this one, Cleet. You and I talked about it earlier this week when I told you what I was doing. So a 3-year-old boy in the Golan Heights, India, actually raised suspicions when he claimed to have been murdered in his past life. The boy was a member of the Druze ethnic group, and they believe in reincarnation. He had a long red birthmark on his head, which, according to Druze beliefs, birthmarks indicate death wounds from a previous life, which is, again, something else you talked about. Now, when he learned to speak, he told the elders that he was killed by an axe blow in his prior life right in the head. So the elders led him through several villages to try and see if they could kind of spark some memory in him. When they came upon a village he recognized, he suddenly claimed to know who killed him by name. So he went up to the man by the name of Eli, and he said, hey, we used to be neighbors. We had a fight, and you killed me with an axe. Now, people are saying that the guy went ghostly white, like this is 3-year-old saying, you killed me with an axe in my previous life. He's like, oh, okay. The boy then said, I even know where you buried my body. So he led the village elders to a pile of stones where underneath they found the body with a deep axe wound in his head. He even led them to a spot where the axe was buried, which caused the killer to confess to the crime.
That's spooky, man.
It's so specific in leading him to a body. Now, again, this is one of the ones that I was actually able to cross-reference across multiple sites. This is the most
famous case.
Yeah,
or
the
something.
most famous case I was able to find with reincarnation. So I don't know. It kind of, again, it makes you kind of wonder. So this 3-year-old says, hey, yeah, you see this birthmark? I'm going to take you to the guy who killed me with an axe and then show you where he buried the body and the axe. No 3-year-old knows that.
I wouldn't know what to do.
You go to the guy who did it and you arrest him. So the last story I have, this one to me it's creepy. I think this is the one that kind of creeped me out the most. So the year is 1957. Jacqueline and Joanna Pollock, ages 4 and 6, were both struck and killed by a car on their way to church. It's really sad. They were really young girls. Roughly a year after the accident, their mother, Florence, became pregnant. Now, the husband, John, was absolutely certain that she was going to have twins. Now, this is right when they found out she's pregnant. He says, you're going to have twins. Not only that, but they're going to be the reincarnated daughters that we lost. It's a little far-fetched, right? So 9 months later, his prediction was true, and twins Gillian and Jennifer were born. It might have been Jillian. I apologize if I mispronounced it. The family moved from their hometown of Hexham, England, when the twins were only 3 months old and didn't return for 4 years. So they're still they're 4 years old. They're within that time frame. When they did return to the hometown, the twins started to name landmarks in the town, including the school they attended.
I mean, it's interesting. My only quip on that is kids' minds are so malleable about that. If their parents already believe that they're going to be the reincarnation of previous kids, who knows what else they're freaking telling them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it could have slipped.
Yeah. Not saying it couldn't be possible, but there are other explanations to these stories.
Right. And we'll kind of go into a little bit more, but I mean, the parents before didn't believe in reincarnation, or so to speak. So for him to be like, they're going to be the reincarnated girls, right? And in twins, and then to have that happen, it all just seems kind of like, I don't know, publicity.
It's compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But anyway, so they included the school they attended. Now, the parents also showed the twins their late sister's toys, and they accurately named all the teddy bears and assorted dolls. So they were like, oh, that one's Billy, that one's George. They named them all. One day, they came across a parked car and hysterically shouted that the car was coming after them, which again is what you referenced. They were scared of something that they had died from in a previous life. So it's just this parked car, and they're like, oh my God, it's coming to kill me. So at the age of 5, these strange occurrences and behavior stopped, which is kind of what you were saying. At the age of 5, they just forget about it. They moves on. The parents state they never told the twins anything about their sisters until they were much older, which made them believe in the idea of reincarnation. But again, to say, oh, you're pregnant, we're going to have twins, and they're the reincarnated daughters, to me, doesn't say that you didn't believe in the reincarnation in the first place.
So I'll tell you, I mean, when I was doing the research on here again, it really did raise the hairs on my arms because some of that stuff is just so strange. The only ulterior thing that I could see that could possibly explain all of these events is somehow their parents are influencing them somehow to think that they're reincarnated. But if you could theoretically rule that out, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it would be a very compelling case for reincarnation.
Right. And I mean, I don't know, in the event of the last story I was talking about with the twins, it would be very hard for the parents not to talk about the late daughters,
right,
in my opinion. I mean, it's such a tragic event that I think you might start to talk about it, especially like the dolls and the teddy bears and stuff. I mean, you don't want to kind of forget them. I mean, it's not something you'd want to tell little girls about. I mean, it really isn't, but you'd probably talk about it behind closed doors, and kids will hear things.
Neighbors, friends.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of things that could be brought up. I don't know. Again, I found all this information online. Depending on whether or not you believe in reincarnation or anything, there's a lot of other stories out there. But I mean, I don't know, doing the research, it just kind of makes you wonder, exactly what's going on, what, if that could even be a thing.
Well, guys, we definitely appreciate you listening to our podcast tonight. As always, like, share, and subscribe. You are the reason why we make these videos, and we want to keep improving. So if you like anything that we're doing or have any suggestions, throw in a comment. We'll do the research that you want.
Exactly. And I want to touch base on that. Even if you just say, I want to hear more about Bigfoot, we will research it. I mean, I think we probably spend, I spend about 6 or 7 hours a week on research.
Per episode, at
per
least.
episode. Yeah. So, I mean, we definitely want to do the research. Again, I know we've talked about it a lot. We're just starting up, but enter theabysspod@gmail.com. It'll all be in the links. We appreciate you guys coming week after week. Hopefully we can continue this for years in the future. We love what we do. We love doing this. We love to scour the internet. My search history is looking kind of dark, if I'm going to be honest with you.
If people look at my Google history, I don't know what's going to happen, man.
I don't know. But we do it because we love it. We're both horror fans. We're both unexplainable mystery fans. So please share this out there. If you enjoy listening to us, we'd love to do this week after week. We'll post every single Sunday. So just give us a shout out. Let us know what you want to hear, and we'll even shout you out in the episode if you give us something we'll talk about.
Thank you for entering the abyss.
Until next week.